He thought docking my pay was just a power move. I never said a word, just started charging his entire department triple to fix what only I knew how to build. When they realized who held the keys, I was already billing them by the hour. $400, to be exact. The same boss who cut $3,000 from my monthly salary now needed my signature on every invoice. Funny how the tables turn when you're the only one who understands the code that runs everything. My name is Madeline Pierce, and I've been the lead software engineer at Orion Tech Solutions for 6 years. At 32, I'd built their entire security infrastructure from scratch, debugged systems that others had given up on, and stayed late countless nights without ever asking for overtime. I was the quiet one in meetings, the one who fixed problems before anyone else noticed they existed. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to tackle the authentication module I'd been refining. The office hummed with its usual energy, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling its familiar rhythm. I had no idea that by 10 a.m., my entire world would shift. The meeting invite popped up on my screen at 9:45 a.m. Budget restructuring discussion, mandatory attendance. My stomach tightened. Budget meetings were never good news, especially when called on short notice. I walked into conference room B to find Brandon Keller already seated at the head of the table, our new department head, 38 years old, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He'd been brought in 3 months ago through some connection with the CEO's golf buddy. Since then, he'd been evaluating efficiencies and optimizing resource allocation, corporate speak for making everyone's life harder while understanding nothing about our actual work. "Madeline, good, you're here," he said without looking up from his laptop. His tone suggested I was late, even though the meeting wasn't supposed to start for another 5 minutes. Other team members filed in: Jake from backend, Sarah from QA, Marcus from DevOps. We exchanged nervous glances. Brandon's assistant, a young woman who always looked terrified, distributed folders to each of us. "I'll cut to the chase," Brandon began, finally closing his laptop with a decisive click. "Orion Tech is entering a new phase of strategic growth. This requires us to reallocate resources more effectively." My folder contained a single sheet of paper. As I read it, the words blurred together, then snapped into sharp focus. Salary adjustment notice, effective immediately. $3,000 per month, gone. "As you can see," Brandon continued, his voice smooth as poison, "we're making targeted adjustments based on measurable performance metrics and departmental value assessments." I looked up, certain this was a mistake. "I'm sorry, but this shows a $3,000 monthly reduction for my position." Brandon's smile was practiced, empty. "Yes, Madeline, after careful evaluation, we've determined that your role, while important, doesn't demonstrate the kind of quantifiable impact that justifies your current compensation level." Quantifiable impact. I'd written every line of the security system that protected millions of dollars in client data. I'd created the APIs that our entire product suite depended on. I'd been here until 2 a.m. last month fixing a critical vulnerability that could have destroyed the company. "We still need you, of course," Brandon added, as if doing me a favor. "But compensation must reflect actual position value. This is just business, nothing personal." Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside me. Jake stared at his folder like it might spontaneously combust. They'd all received papers too, but I could tell from their expressions that mine was the deepest cut. "Do you have any questions?" Brandon asked, already gathering his materials. 1,000 responses screamed in my head. Questions about the new BMW he'd parked in the executive spot last week, about the team lunch he'd expensed at a restaurant where appetizers cost $50, about how someone who couldn't even understand basic Git commands could evaluate my quantifiable impact. Instead, I said quietly, "No questions." "Excellent. HR will process the changes by end of day. Now, let's all get back to building great things." His enthusiasm was obscene. I returned to my desk in a daze. 6 years, 9 major releases, not a single sick day that wasn't planned weeks in advance. And this was my reward, a salary cut disguised as strategic restructuring from a man who probably couldn't write a Hello World program if his life depended on it. My computer screen showed 17 pending code reviews, 4 urgent bug fixes, and a security audit due by Friday. The same work, now for $3,000 less per month. That was my daughter's college fund contribution, my mortgage overpayment that would have had me debt-free 5 years early, my mother's nursing home upgrade to a room with a garden view. But I didn't say a word. I just opened my IDE and got back to work. My fingers moving across the keyboard with the same precision as always. Let Brandon think he'd won. Let him believe I was just another quiet engineer who'd accept whatever scraps they threw my way. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. The drive home that evening was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Brandon's words echoing in my head. Doesn't demonstrate quantifiable impact. The arrogance of it burned like acid in my throat. I'd maintained my composure in the office, even managed to fix 3 critical bugs before leaving at 6 p.m. But alone in my car, the full weight of the insult crashed over me. $3,000 wasn't just money, it was respect, recognition, validation for years of invisible labor that kept Orion Tech running smoothly. My apartment felt smaller that night. I poured a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, staring at my bank statements. Without that $3,000 monthly, I'd have to choose Mom's nursing home upgrade or my daughter Emma's college fund. The numbers didn't lie, and they didn't care about my 6 years of dedication. I pulled out my employment contract, the one I'd signed when Orion Tech was still a startup with big dreams. Back then, the CEO was Marcus Webb, a brilliant man who understood code and respected the people who wrote it. He'd retired 8 months ago, right before Brandon's arrival. I wondered if he knew what was happening to his company. Page by page, I read through the dense legal language. Most of it was standard non-disclosure agreements, invention assignment clauses, termination procedures, but then, buried in section 7.3.4, something caught my eye. A clause about intellectual property rights and individual creative works developed using personal resources. My heart rate quickened. I remembered this clause. Marcus had specifically pointed it out during my hiring, explaining how he wanted to protect engineers' side projects. Innovation doesn't stop at 5 p.m., he'd said. If you build something brilliant on your own time, with your own tools, it's yours. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You don't remember me, but I remember you. Check your email. E.G. My personal email contained a single message with the subject line, "You have options." The sender was Elliot Graves, Proton Mail, com. Ms. Pierce, I doubt you recall our brief meeting 4 years ago during the Patent Core acquisition. I was internal legal counsel then, working directly with Marcus Webb. I've been following the recent changes at Orion Tech with concern. Your situation, in particular, seems unnecessarily punitive. If you're interested in understanding your full legal position, I'm available for coffee tomorrow at 7 a.m. The Vintage Grind on 5th Street, Elliot Graves. I read the email 3 times. Elliot Graves. The name tugged at a memory, a tall, serious man who'd asked detailed questions about our authentication systems during due diligence. He'd been one of the few lawyers who actually understood the technical aspects of what we'd built. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities. Every system at Orion Tech bore my fingerprints. The security infrastructure, the API framework, the data encryption protocols, I'd written them all. But more importantly, I'd done much of that work at home, on my personal laptop, during the countless unpaid hours I'd invested in making sure everything was perfect. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to my home office. I had backups. Of course, every good engineer does. External drives filled with code commits, documentation, system architectures. I'd never planned to use them for anything beyond reference, but now they seemed to pulse with possibility. I pulled up the Git logs from my personal repositories. There it was, clear as day, thousands of commits from my personal email address, time-stamped during evenings and weekends, the core authentication module built entirely on a Saturday, the encryption framework designed during my vacation when I couldn't stop thinking about a vulnerability, the API gateway architected at 2 a.m. when insomnia struck and coding was my only comfort. Brandon thought he could measure my value in dollars and cents, reduce my contributions to metrics on a spreadsheet. He saw me as just another programmer, replaceable, forgettable. Someone who would accept whatever scraps he offered because I was quiet, professional, never one to make waves. But I wasn't just any programmer, I was the architect of their entire digital infrastructure. And thanks to Marcus Webb's foresight and that carefully worded clause, I might actually own more of it than Orion Tech realized. My phone showed 4:47 a.m. In a few hours, I'd meet Elliot Graves and learn exactly what options I had. But I already knew one thing with absolute certainty: Brandon Keller had no idea what he'd awakened when he decided to cut my salary. He thought he was punishing a quiet, compliant employee. Instead, he'd lit a fuse. The explosion was coming, he just didn't know it yet. The vintage grind was nearly empty at 7 a.m., just how I suspected Elliot Graves had planned it. He sat in the corner booth, wearing a charcoal suit that looked expensive but not flashy, reading through a stack of papers. When he saw me, he stood a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Ms. Pierce, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, his gray eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Up close, I remembered him more clearly, the lawyer who'd asked about buffer overflow protections and actually understood my answers. "Mr. Graves, your email was intriguing. Please, call me Elliot. Coffee." We ordered black for him, cappuccino for me, and waited until the barista retreated behind the counter before speaking again. "I'll be direct," Elliot began, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "When I left Orion Tech 14 months ago, it wasn't by choice. I'd raised concerns about the new leadership's approach to intellectual property management. They didn't appreciate my vigilance." He slid a document across the table. My name was at the top: Pierce Analytics LLC, Certificate of Formation. "What is this?" I stared at the paper, confused. "Something you signed 4 years ago, buried in a stack of acquisition paperwork. Marcus Webb insisted on it, a protective measure for key engineers. Technically, you've been the sole proprietor of an LLC this entire time." My mind raced. "I don't understand. Why would Marcus—" "Because he knew this day might come." Elliot leaned forward. "Marcus watched too many talented engineers get screwed over by corporate restructuring. So he built in safeguards. That LLC was created as a temporary IP holding vehicle. Every time you worked on personal equipment, outside of office hours, the rights technically flowed to your LLC first. But I assigned all work-related inventions to Orion Tech. It's in my employment contract. Work-related inventions created during company time, using company resources." Elliot's smile was sharp. "I've reviewed your Git commits. Ms. Pierce, would it surprise you to learn that 73% of the core security infrastructure was committed from IP addresses registered to your home internet service, time-stamped during nights and weekends?" My cappuccino suddenly tasted like possibility. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that when Brandon Keller reduced your salary, he may have triggered a clause that allows you to reclaim ownership of any IP developed under adverse employment changes. It's buried in subsection 7.3.4c of your original contract, a poison pill Marcus insisted on including." Elliot produced another document. "This is a patent filing from 3 years ago. You're listed as sole inventor on the authentication framework. Orion Tech is assigned usage rights, but ownership remains with, let me check, yes, Pierce Analytics LLC. I never filed any patents. Marcus filed them on your behalf, using the LLC structure, all perfectly legal, all waiting for the right moment." He paused, studying my face. "That moment appears to be now." The implications hit me like a wave. If I own the patents through this LLC, then Orion Tech has been licensing your technology, and licenses can be revoked under certain conditions like material breach of the employment agreement, a 30% salary reduction without cause. That's textbook material breach. This can't be legal. Oh, it's entirely legal. Unusual, certainly. But Marcus Webb was a careful man who valued his engineers. He built this safety net, hoping it would never be needed. Elliot pulled out his phone, showing me an email thread. "I've been monitoring the situation since Brandon's arrival. Your salary cut was the final straw. Why do you care?" His expression hardened. "Because Brandon Keller represents everything wrong with modern tech leadership. He's a parasite who feeds on the work of people like you. Marcus built Orion Tech on principles of fairness and innovation, watching it be destroyed by MBA-wielding vultures." He shook his head. Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see justice done. I thought about my mother, about Emma's college fund, about 6 years of 60-hour weeks. What would this mean? Practically speaking. Practically. You could revoke Orion Tech's license to use your authentication framework. The entire system would need to be rebuilt from scratch, a process that would take months and cost millions, or so. He paused for effect. You could renegotiate the licensing terms, as an independent contractor, at market rates. And those rates would be, for a system handling 50 million in daily transactions, for the only person who understands the architecture, I'd say 400 an hour would be conservative. 400 an hour. The number hung in the air between us like a challenge. There's more, Elliot continued. The data encryption protocols, the API gateway, the automated testing suite, all developed primarily on your own time, all technically owned by Pierce Analytics LLC. I sat back, overwhelmed. This is a lot to process. Take your time, but not too much time. He gathered his papers. Brandon is planning another round of restructuring next month. Sarah from QA and Marcus from DevOps are likely targets. Once he's removed everyone who actually understands the systems, he'll have complete control. Exactly. But if you act now, while you still have access and institutional knowledge, Elliot stood, leaving a business card on the table. My consultation is free. Ms. Pierce, the revenge, that's priceless. As he walked away, I stared at the LLC certificate, Pierce Analytics LLC. I'd owned a company for 4 years without knowing it, and now, thanks to Brandon's greed and Marcus's foresight, I had options. For the first time since yesterday's meeting, I smiled. I spent the next 3 days operating on autopilot at Orion Tech, arriving at 8 a.m., leaving at 5 p.m., fixing bugs, reviewing code, attending meetings where Brandon pontificated about synergy and optimization while understanding nothing. But beneath my calm exterior, I was preparing. Each evening, I met with Elliot at his downtown office. We reviewed contracts, documented code ownership, and prepared the legal framework for what was coming. The more we uncovered, the more staggering it became. Marcus Webb hadn't just protected me, he'd protected all of his key engineers. I was simply the first to need it. You'll want to transfer the patents from the LLC to your personal control first, Elliot advised on Wednesday night. Then re-establish the LLC with updated operating agreements. It's cleaner that way. By Thursday afternoon, everything was in place, the paperwork filed, the intellectual property transfers documented, the licensing agreements drafted. All that remained was my resignation. I typed it Thursday night, keeping it simple. To Brandon Keller, CCHR Department, date October 12, 2024, re-resignation, effective immediately. This letter serves as formal notice of my resignation from Orion Tech Solutions, effective immediately. Regards, Madeline Pierce. No explanations, no accusations, no bridges burned, at least not visibly. I scheduled the email for 8 a.m. Friday morning, then spent the rest of the night backing up my personal items and removing my few belongings from my desk. A coffee mug Emma had made in 3rd grade, a photo from the first product launch, 6 years condensed into a small cardboard box. At 11:59 p.m. Thursday, I ran one final script from my personal laptop, a completely legal backup of all my personal code contributions, already isolated from Orion Tech's proprietary data. Everything I'd built on my own time, now safely stored on encrypted drives. Friday morning, I sat in my apartment, watching my phone. The resignation email sent at 8 a.m. By 8:03, my phone exploded with notifications. Brandon called first. I let it go to voicemail. Then Sarah from QA. Her message frantic. Madeline, what's happening? Brandon's losing his mind. Jake texted, please tell me you have another job lined up. This place won't survive without you. But the most interesting message came at 9:15 a.m. from the IT security system itself, an automated alert I'd programmed years ago. License verification failed. Authentication framework entering grace period. 72 hours until system lockout. Right on schedule. You see, when I'd built the authentication framework on my personal time, I'd included a simple license check. Nothing malicious, just a routine verification that confirmed the system was properly licensed. For 4 years. That check had passed silently. The license file renewed automatically through Pierce Analytics LLC. But when Elliot and I transferred the IP ownership Thursday night, we deliberately let the auto-renewal lapse. The system would continue functioning normally for 72 hours, a grace period I'd built in to prevent accidental outages. After that, it would enter read-only mode. No new users, no password changes, no security updates. Orion Tech would effectively be frozen. My phone rang again, the CEO's direct line. I almost felt bad for him. David Morrison was a decent man who'd inherited a mess when Marcus retired, but he'd also signed off on Brandon's budget cuts. This time, I answered. Madeline, thank God. What's happening? Brandon says you resigned without notice, and now it is reporting some kind of system error. Good morning, David. Yes, I resigned. As for the system error, I wouldn't know. I'm no longer an Orion Tech employee. But you can't just leave. We need transition time, documentation, knowledge transfer. I provided 6 years of exemplary service. David, I documented everything Orion Tech owned. As for what Orion Tech licensed well, that's a different matter. Silence. Then, cautiously, what do you mean, licensed? I'd suggest you have legal review my original employment contract. Section 7.3.4 might be particularly illuminating. Have a good day, David. I hung up and turned off my phone. Elliot had advised me to be unreachable for at least 24 hours. Let them panic, he'd said. Desperation makes for better negotiations. Outside my window, the city hummed with its usual Friday energy. People heading to jobs where they were valued, or at least adequately compensated. For 6 years, I'd accepted less than I was worth, convinced that loyalty and hard work would eventually be rewarded. Brandon Keller had taught me otherwise. He'd shown me that in his world, quiet competence was weakness, dedication was exploitability, and knowledge was only valuable if you controlled it. Well, I'd learned my lesson. I poured myself a cup of coffee, good coffee. Not the break room swill I'd tolerated for years, and opened my laptop. Pierce Analytics LLC had a website to build, a rate sheet to create, and a very specific list of services to offer. At the top of that list, emergency authentication framework support and licensing. Market rate, $400 per hour, 3-hour minimum, payment in advance. It was petty, perhaps vindictive, certainly, but as I uploaded the site and watched it go live, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Brandon Keller thought he'd crushed a weak engineer under his heel. Instead, he'd created a competitor, one who knew every line of code, every vulnerability, every secret Orion Tech's entire digital infrastructure depended on. And in approximately 71 hours, they were going to realize just how expensive that $3,000 monthly salary cut was about to become. By Saturday afternoon, the calls had escalated from urgent to desperate. I kept my phone off but monitored my email through my laptop. The subject lines told the story of Orion Tech's growing panic. Urgent system authentication issues. Critical need immediate assistance. Please respond. License expiration imminent. The most revealing email came from Jake, sent from his personal account at 11:43 p.m. Saturday. Madeline, I'm not supposed to contact you, but it's chaos here. Brandon called an all-hands emergency meeting at 8 p.m. Friday. He blamed the whole thing on poor documentation and your unprofessional exit. Then he demanded the entire engineering team work through the weekend to rebuild the authentication system from scratch. The problem? Nobody understands your code. It's brilliant, elegant, and completely incomprehensible without your documentation, which, as it turns out, lives on servers we can't access because, wait for it, they require authentication through the very system that's about to lock us out. Brandon's been screaming at everyone. He actually told Sarah she was worthless when she couldn't reverse engineer your encryption protocols. She walked out. Marcus from DevOps followed an hour later. The CEO brought in external consultants at midnight. They took one look at the system architecture and said it would take them 3 months minimum to rebuild if they had access to the current codebase, which they won't, once the lockout happens. I'm job hunting. Thought you should know what you've accomplished. Also, Brandon apparently punched a wall and broke his hand. Security has it on camera. Good luck with whatever comes next, Jake. I read the email twice, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Jake and the remaining engineers didn't deserve this chaos, but Brandon had created this situation when he decided to devalue the very people who kept his department running. Sunday morning brought a new development. At 6:30 a.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David Morrison himself, looking haggard in an uncharacteristic polo shirt and jeans. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. David. Madeline, please, we need to talk. We are talking. He rubbed his face, exhaustion evident in every line. The system locks out in 18 hours. Our entire operation depends on that authentication framework, client data, financial transactions, employee records, everything. I'm aware I built it. Brandon made a mistake. We all did. Can we fix this? I leaned against the doorframe. That depends. Are you here as CEO of Orion Tech or as Brandon's messenger? Brandon's been placed on administrative leave pending review. David's admission came through gritted teeth. The board held an emergency session last night. His decision to cut your salary without consulting legal or technical leadership showed, quote, catastrophic judgment. And yet the cut was approved, processed by HR, signed off by leadership. David's shoulders sagged. You're right. We failed you. I failed you. I trusted Brandon's assessment without doing due diligence. But punishing the entire company? I'm not punishing anyone. David, I resigned from a position where I was undervalued. The fact that Orion Tech improperly licensed critical infrastructure from my LLC isn't punishment, it's consequence. Your LLC. His confusion seemed genuine. Pierce Analytics LLC, established 4 years ago, owner of several key patents that Orion Tech has been using under an auto-renewing license agreement, a license that expired when I transferred the IP rights, all completely legal, all documented in contracts your own legal team approved. I watched the blood drain from his face as the implications hit him. Marcus knew. Marcus protected his engineers. He understood our value even if his successors didn't. What do you want? Madeline. I don't want anything. Pierce Analytics LLC, however, is prepared to offer emergency consulting services and temporary licensing agreements. Our rates are on the website. David pulled out his phone, typing quickly. His expression when he found the site was almost comical. $400 an hour. Industry standard for specialized emergency support. Considering I'm the only person who understands the system, it's actually quite reasonable. Goldman Sachs paid $800 an hour for similar services last year. This is extortion. This is capitalism. I stepped back. The same system that allowed Brandon to cut my salary because he could, now I'm setting my rates because I can. Free market at work. The board will never approve. Then I suggest you prepare for a complete system rebuild. The consultants gave you a 3-month estimate. They're being optimistic. Your authentication framework isn't just code. It's integrated into every service, every API, every client touchpoint. You're looking at 6 months minimum, assuming you can find engineers willing to work for a company that just lost its entire technical leadership. My phone buzzed. Elliot, texting from his office. Local news picked up the story. Tech giant faces crisis after key engineer departure, reporters asking for comment. I showed David the text. Once this goes public, your stock price will crater, client confidence will evaporate, but hey, at least you saved $3,000 a month on my salary. He aged 10 years in that moment. We'll pay your rates. 3-month minimum contract while we figure things out. Contracts go through my attorney, Elliot Graves. He'll send terms tomorrow morning. Payment in advance, of course. Of course. The defeat in his voice was total. As David walked away, I felt the strangest sensation. Not guilt he'd enabled Brandon's behavior, not joy destroying things had never been my goal. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my entire career respected. For the first time, my knowledge had a price tag that reflected its true value, $400 an hour. Brandon Keller had tried to tell me I was worth $3,000 less per month. The market was about to prove him very, very wrong. Monday morning arrived with the force of a hurricane. By 7 a.m., Elliot's office was buzzing with activity. He'd brought in 2 junior associates to handle the sudden influx of legal documentation, while I sat in his conference room, watching the chaos unfold through news feeds and insider messages. Orion Tech stock plunges 15% on system failure rumors. Anonymous sources report, complete authentication lockout at tech firm. CEO David Morrison to hold emergency press conference at 9 a.m. Elliot entered carrying a stack of papers and wearing the satisfied expression of a chess player who just achieved checkmate. Their legal team worked through the night. They're challenging everything: the LLC ownership, the patent transfers, even your original employment contract. Let me guess, I said, sipping my coffee. They're claiming I developed everything within scope of employment. Exactly, but here's where it gets interesting. He spread documents across the table. I had my associates pull every Git commit, every timestamp, every IP log from the past 4 years. 73% of the authentication framework was developed on your personal equipment. The encryption protocols, 81%. The API gateway, 92%. They can't argue with data. They're certainly trying, but look at this. He pointed to a highlighted section. This is from Orion Tech's own security audit last year. They praised the authentication system's innovative architecture developed through extraordinary dedication, including significant after-hours contributions. Their own documentation admits you worked beyond normal scope. My phone buzzed. Sarah from QA. Watching Brandon clean out his office, security escort and everything, he's trying to blame you for sabotage. Nobody's buying it. At 8:30 a.m., Elliot's assistant knocked. Ms. Pierce, there's a call from Morrison's office. They want to discuss expedited resolution. I looked at Elliot. He shrugged. Your call, but remember every hour that passes costs them more. I took the call on speaker. David's voice was strained. Madeline, our legal team has reviewed the contracts. While we maintain that certain claims are disputable, we're prepared to move forward with licensing agreements to restore service immediately. I'm listening. 3-month contract at your stated rates, full payment in advance, but we need you on site within the hour. I don't work on site anymore. David, remote support only. That's not feasible. The systems require someone who understands them. That person is me. I can resolve everything remotely. Or you can wait for your consultants to figure it out in 6 months. Silence. Then, fine, remote work, but we need immediate action. Wire the first month's payment to the account Elliot's sending you. $96,000. Once confirmed, I'll begin work. 96. That's insane. That's mathematics. 400 per hour. 40 hours per week. 3 weeks minimum to stabilize and document everything. Unless you'd prefer the 6-month consultant timeline. We'll wire the funds. By 10 a.m., the money had arrived. I opened my laptop, connected through a secure VPN, and began the delicate process of extending the authentication licenses. Within minutes, Orion Tech's systems flickered back to life. The relief in IT's group chat was palpable. Systems green across the board. Authentication restored. Thank God. Thank Madeline. But I wasn't done. As part of the agreement, I now had full access to document every system, every dependency, every critical function I'd built. For the first time, Orion Tech would understand exactly how much they'd been relying on my after-hours work. By noon, I generated a comprehensive report, 800 pages detailing the architecture, dependencies, and replacement costs for systems built primarily on my own time. The total value: $43 million. I sent it directly to the board of directors, CCing David and the legal team. The response was immediate. David called within minutes. $43 million. Conservative estimate. Would you like me to break down the calculations, for instance? The encryption protocol alone would cost $8 million to replace, assuming you could find cryptographers willing to... Stop, please. He sounded broken. What do you want? Madeline, really? I have what I want. Fair compensation for my expertise, respect for my contributions, the ability to work without dealing with Brandon Kellers who think an MBA makes them qualified to evaluate technical work they don't understand. Brandon's gone. The board terminated him an hour ago. Full severance forfeit due to gross mismanagement. I felt a flicker of satisfaction but kept my voice neutral. Good start. We want you back, Madeline. Name your terms, salary, title, anything. I don't want to come back. David, I want to continue as an independent contractor. Pierce Analytics LLC will maintain your systems, provide updates, and ensure security. In exchange, you'll pay market rates and treat my company as the critical vendor it is. For how long? As long as it takes you to build internal capabilities. I'll even help train your new team for an additional consulting fee. Of course. He laughed bitterly. Of course. Anything else? Actually, yes. Sarah Chen deserves a 30% raise, and Jake Martinez should be promoted to lead architect. They're talented engineers who've been undervalued too long. Consider it professional advice. Done. As I ended the call, Elliot raised his coffee mug in a toast. To Pierce Analytics LLC, may all your clients learn expensive lessons about valuing expertise. I clinked my mug against his. 6 months ago. I'd been a quiet engineer accepting whatever scraps they threw me. Now I was a business owner charging $400 an hour to fix problems only I could solve. Brandon Keller had tried to diminish my worth by $3,000 a month. Instead, he'd taught me to claim my full value $96,000 for 3 weeks' work. The best part. This was just the beginning. 3 months passed in a blur of billable hours and growing reputation. Pierce Analytics LLC wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Word spread quickly in the tech community about the engineer who'd turned a salary cut into a 6-figure consulting contract. My inbox filled with inquiries from other companies wanting security audits, architecture reviews, and custom development work. But my primary client remained Orion Tech, bound by necessity to pay my rates, while they scrambled to build internal capabilities. Every Monday, I'd send my invoice. Every Monday, they'd pay without complaint. The accounting department probably had my wire transfer details memorized by now. It was a Thursday afternoon in January when I received an unexpected email. Ms. Pierce, the Board of Directors requests your presence at our quarterly stakeholder meeting next Tuesday at 2 p.m. This is regarding the long-term strategic relationship between Orion Tech and Pierce Analytics LLC. Formal attire requested. Janet Williams, Board Secretary. Elliot reviewed the invitation that evening. They want to renegotiate. Your 3-month contract expires next week. Let them want. I have other clients now. Including Technova and Meridian Systems, Orion Tech's biggest competitors, he smiled. I'm sure that hasn't escaped their notice. Tuesday arrived crisp and clear. I dressed carefully, a charcoal suit that cost more than my old monthly salary, purchased with my first consulting payment. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the quiet engineer who'd accepted disrespect in silence. This was Madeline Pierce, CEO of Pierce Analytics LLC. Orion Tech's boardroom hadn't changed, but everything else had. The receptionist greeted me as Ms. Pierce. With genuine respect, the security guard held the elevator, small gestures that spoke volumes about shifted power dynamics. The board sat assembled around the polished table, 7 faces ranging from curious to resigned. David Morrison looked healthier than he had 3 months ago, though stress lines remained etched around his eyes. And there, at the far end, sat someone I hadn't expected. Brandon Keller. He looked smaller somehow. The expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. The careful way he held his right hand still healing from punching that wall. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Ms. Pierce, thank you for coming. The board chair, Patricia Winters, began. We've asked you here to discuss Orion Tech's future relationship with your company. I'm listening. Over the past 3 months, you've billed us approximately $400,000 in consulting fees. $412,800, I corrected. All for services rendered according to our agreement. Yes, well, Patricia shuffled papers. We've also noticed you've taken on several of our competitors as clients. Is there a problem? We'd like to propose an exclusive arrangement. Orion Tech would retain Pierce Analytics as our sole security consultant, preventing you from working with competitors. I leaned back, letting silence fill the room. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. David watched me carefully. What are you offering in exchange for exclusivity? A 2-year contract at $300 per hour, guaranteed 40 hours per week. I did the math quickly. That's a pay cut. My current rate is $400. For emergency services, this would be ongoing, stable work. My rate is my rate, Ms. Winters. It doesn't decrease based on your convenience. Brandon finally spoke, his voice rougher than I remembered. You can't seriously expect... Mr. Keller? Patricia's tone could have frozen helium. You're here as an observer only, given your previous involvement in this situation. His face flushed, but he subsided. Additionally, I continued, exclusivity would require compensation for lost opportunities. Technova alone is offering me a $250,000 contract for security architecture. Meridian wants a full system audit. You're asking me to walk away from significant revenue. What would make it worth your while? David asked. I'd prepared for this moment. $500 per hour, minimum 30 hours per week, 2-year contract with a 6-month severance clause if terminated early, and I paused, meeting Brandon's eyes for the first time. A formal, written apology from Mr. Keller acknowledging his miscalculation of my value. The room erupted. Board members talked over each other. Brandon's face went from red to purple. Patricia banged her gavel for order. That's vindictive, Brandon spat. That's accountability, I replied calmly. You cost Orion Tech millions with your optimization. You drove away talent. You created this situation. The least you can do is acknowledge it. The apology is non-negotiable, Patricia asked. Correct. Published in the company newsletter and the tech industry publication of my choice. David covered a smile. Several board members looked thoughtful. They'd all suffered from Brandon's incompetence. This was their chance for symbolic justice. We'll need to discuss. Of course, I stood. You have 24 hours. After that, I'll be signing contracts with Technova and Meridian. Good afternoon. I walked out with measured steps, maintaining composure until the elevator doors closed. Then I smiled. They'd agree they had no choice. The cost of replacing my knowledge would dwarf my consulting fees. That evening, my phone rang at 8:47 p.m. Patricia Winters herself. We accept your terms, all of them. Mr. Keller will submit his apology by Friday. Excellent. Have Elliot draw up the contracts. Ms. Pierce, may I speak frankly? Please do. What you've accomplished turning a salary cut into a thriving business, it's remarkable. But was humiliating Brandon really necessary? I thought about 6 years of undervaluation, about the casual dismissal of my contributions, about every woman in tech who'd been told she wasn't worth her salary by men who couldn't understand her work. Yes, I said simply. It was... Thursday's company newsletter featured Brandon's apology on the front page. It was everything I'd demanded, a full acknowledgement of his failures, the value of technical expertise, and the cost of underestimating quiet employees. By Friday, it was trending on TechCrunch under the headline, How One Engineer Turned a $3,000 Pay Cut into a $500-hour Consulting Empire. The article included a photo from the board meeting, captured by someone's phone, me, standing confident in my charcoal suit, while Brandon sat slumped in defeat. The caption read, Sometimes the best revenge is a higher hourly rate. $400 had been my starting price. Now it was $500. And Brandon Keller. He'd learned that cutting my salary hadn't saved Orion Tech money. It had taught me what I was really worth. 6 months into my exclusive contract with Orion Tech, I received an invitation that made me pause. The annual Tech Leadership Summit wanted me as their keynote speaker. The topic, From Employee to Empire, Recognizing Your Worth in Tech. I accepted. The morning of the summit, I stood backstage at the Moscone Center, adjusting my microphone. Through the curtain, I could hear the crowd, over 3,000 engineers, developers, and yes, executives, all waiting to hear how a quiet programmer had flipped the script on corporate devaluation. Please welcome Madeline Pierce, CEO of Pierce Analytics, LLC. The applause was thunderous. I walked onto that stage not as the overlooked engineer who'd accepted whatever was offered, but as living proof that knowing your worth could change everything. 2 years ago, I began, my boss cut my salary by $3,000 a month. He thought he was saving the company money. Instead, he taught me the most valuable lesson of my career: never let anyone else determine your value. I told them everything, the shock of that budget meeting, the discovery of the LLC Marcus Webb had secretly created to protect us. The 72 hours of system lockout that brought a multi-million-dollar company to its knees. And yes, the satisfaction of charging $500 an hour to fix problems I'd once solved for a fraction of that. But this isn't really about revenge, I said, looking out at the sea of faces. It's about recognition. How many of you have been told your contributions can't be quantified? How many have watched less qualified people make decisions about your worth? How many have accepted less because you were taught that being quiet, being professional, being dedicated meant being satisfied with scraps? Hands raised throughout the auditorium. Too many to count. Brandon Keller did me a favor. He showed me that loyalty without leverage is just exploitation, that dedication without boundaries is just donation, that expertise without proper compensation is just charity and corporations aren't charities. The presentation slides behind me showed the numbers, from a $75,000 salary to $1 million annual consulting revenue. From one company taking me for granted to dozens seeking my expertise. From accepting a pay cut in silence to demanding public apologies from those who'd wronged me. Some people called what I did vindictive. Others said it was unprofessional. But you know what's really unprofessional? Undervaluing the people who build your success. Cutting salaries while giving yourself bonuses. Promoting based on connections rather than competence. As I spoke, I spotted familiar faces in the audience. Sarah, now VP of Quality Assurance at Orion Tech, beaming with pride. Jake, wearing his lead architect badge, nodding along. Even David Morrison sat in the third row, having invited his entire leadership team to attend. The tech industry runs on the brilliance of people who are often too focused on solving problems to advocate for themselves. We're taught that good work speaks for itself, but I'm here to tell you it doesn't. You have to speak for your work. You have to demand recognition. You have to know your worth and refuse to accept less. I pulled up my final slide, a screenshot of that first Pierce Analytics invoice. $96,000 for 3 weeks of work. This isn't about becoming a consultant or starting your own company. It's about recognizing that your knowledge, your expertise, your contribution has value. Real, quantifiable, non-negotiable value. Don't let anyone, not a manager, not a company, not an entire industry convince you otherwise. The applause started before I finished, building to a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed with messages. Engineers sharing their own stories. Developers planning to renegotiate their contracts. CTOs wanting to ensure they weren't the next Brandon Keller. That evening, I met Elliot for dinner at the same restaurant where Orion Tech's executives used to hold their power lunches, the one where appetizers cost $50. We could afford it now. So what's next? He asked. Pierce Analytics is booked solid for the next 18 months. You've got 3 junior consultants working under you. You're practically printing money. I smiled, thinking about the scholarship fund I'd just established for women in STEM. About my mother's new room with not just a garden view, but a private garden. About Emma's college fund, now large enough for any school she chose. Remember when Brandon called that meeting when he said my contributions couldn't be quantified? The $3,000 mistake heard round the tech world. He was wrong about the quantification, but he was right about one thing: my impact couldn't be measured by his metrics. It was worth so much more than he could possibly understand. We raised our glasses not in toast to revenge or vindication, but to recognition. To every quiet professional who'd been undervalued. To everyone who'd been told they were worth less by someone who couldn't comprehend their worth. Brandon Keller had cut my salary by $3,000 a month. In return, I'd built an empire that charged his company $500 an hour. Some might call that poetic justice. I just called it knowing my worth. And I was never going to forget it again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about knowing your worth in the workplace. Have you ever been undervalued? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments.